My name is Jane Tillman Irving. I'm president of the New York Press Club, and I want to welcome you to the second event in our 2020 Speakers Series. We've had to do a lot of things differently during this time of pandemic, but one of our core missions remains the same: bringing you conversations with some of the most important journalists of our time. All of this is being made possible by our good friends at Con Edison. We are very grateful for their long-standing and continuing support of the New York Press Club and its activities. Thank you, Con Ed. Our guest tonight is a journalist who does not hesitate to speak his mind. Don Lemon brings his perspective to your TV screen Monday through Friday at 10 p.m. Eastern as the host of CNN Tonight. He will be interviewed by our member, David Cruz of Gothamist. I'm proud to introduce David Cruz and Don Lemon.
Thank you, Madam President. Before we begin, we just have one programming note. We want to let attendees know that if you wish to submit a question, please get out of full screen so that you can see the submit question button to click there to ask a question. 2020 has been a year like no other. A global pandemic has killed more than 200,000 Americans and upended life as we know it. The brutal death of George Floyd, a Black man killed by police in Minneapolis, Minnesota, has sparked nationwide protests against racial injustice and a reckoning on race in newsrooms, large and small. All of this is set against the backdrop of a presidential election that will determine the fate of the nation. Throughout all this, journalists have been chronicling these historic moments and even become the news themselves, risking a great deal to get the news to the public. The turbulence has inspired us to look inward, with questions on objectivity even coming to the forefront at newsrooms. The New York Press Club sought to unpack the intersectionality of all of these topics with someone who routinely discusses them. Don Lemon, CNN correspondent and news anchor of CNN Tonight with Don Lemon, which airs at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on CNN. He has recently co-hosted an hour-long special on CNN called The Color of COVID, and hosts a weekly podcast called Silence is Not an Option. Don, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. And before I get to our conversation, I should apologize in advance if there's some crosstalk, Don, as we are experiencing a 2-second delay. But I want to begin with a question I've been eager to ask you. In these last 4 years, President Donald Trump has really dug deep into the press, uttering phrases such as fake news and even the enemy of the people that have become part of the American lexicon. How demoralizing are the president's words to a free press? Or is it the opposite? Have journalists been more emboldened these days?
Well, I actually think it's a combination. I don't think I think words like that from any president are not good for the free press. I mean, the free press is protected in the First Amendment of the Constitution, that we are to hold people in power accountable. And that is obviously why our forefathers put it there. So I think that, in these times, I know that in these times that a number of institutions are under attack. Journalism is one of those institutions. So I think that it's never good when you have the leader of the free world attacking the press. It can be dangerous in a number of ways. But I also think it has emboldened journalists, and I'm not sure if embolden is the right word. I think what it has done for journalists, it has motivated us to make sure that we hold people accountable, to make sure that we get the truth, but more than anything in this time, to make sure that we get it right. And so there's nothing different. I think that most journalists, especially legacy journalists, I don't think we approach our jobs differently in any way. What we do now, I think, is strive to make sure that we are factually correct as much as possible. We don't try to be first. We just want to be accurate, because when you're not, it gives this administration especially ammunition to say that we are fake and to try to marginalize us.
And before we begin talking about your career, I'm thinking just of today's news in light of the president's COVID-19 diagnosis. I'm curious if his relentless war with the media led to this unwillingness to take COVID seriously. And is this why we are not seeing the kind of transparency that reporters want to see with respect to his progress? And also, was it just a matter of time before someone like the president would be getting the virus?
Well, I think, listen, there's a couple different questions. You may have to remind me of all three of them by the time we're done. But here's the thing that I think that, of course, it has hurt the country in the sense that people aren't taking it seriously. We don't have enough buy-in. We don't have enough cooperation from people who should be cooperating, who should be wearing masks, who should be social distancing. We didn't obviously have enough PPE, personal protective equipment, in the beginning. And people take their cues from the top. It all stems from the top. So if the leader of the free world had taken this seriously in the beginning, or at least with some urgency, a better degree of urgency, I think that we would have been in a much different place right now. And scientists also believe that as well, because people would have socially distanced. Perhaps they would have worn masks earlier when the evidence came out that masks actually do help. So do I think it was, I think that, yes, the buy-in from the public would have been better, especially those diehard Trump supporters who are in many places now, or a number of places that are hotspots. I think that they, perhaps the middle of the country, which doesn't have as many people who travel from international places, I think that they would have been better off. And perhaps they may not have even seen hotspots or seen at least the number of cases go up, or the number of cases that they eventually ended up having and are having now. The other question was, do I think it was inevitable? I forget what the one was in the middle. You had another one in the middle. Of course it's inevitable. It's science. This has nothing to do with whether someone is a Democrat or Republican or whatever your ideology is. This is just about science. And if you don't do what the scientists say, then you're going to put other people and yourself at risk. And that's what people are doing now, because they are believing that this is a hoax, that it was a Democratic plot somehow, at least a response to it, and on and on and on. And you saw people in stores and in businesses and out in public fighting. You're taking away my freedom. I don't want to wear a mask, because the president himself, the person they take the cues from, said, I can't see myself wearing a mask. People can do what they want. They can use their better judgment, open up the businesses, open up the stores, open up the schools, and so on. Stop taking away people's personal liberties. And now you have these hotspots all over the country that people are just doing whack-a-mole now to try to put out.
And the second question had to do with the second question had to do with the level of transparency that reporters are asking of this administration. Yes. With respect to his progress. I mean, it seems as if we're getting contradictory information. And so does that sort of play into the fact that he's just someone, or this White House is simply just not a very transparent White House?
Well, we are getting conflicting. It's not that as if we are getting conflicting information, because his doctor and the doctors on the scene, the doctors who are treating him have had to come out and correct themselves as regards to his treatments and his condition and whether he was on oxygen and so on and so forth. So there is no transparency when it comes to this in this administration, because there is no truth at the center of all of this. There is no truth. Again, it was a hoax, and herd immunity and bleach and disinfectants. So there has been very little truth, if any, surrounding this virus as it relates to the administration. So I think, and I think it's all the same thing. It affects the transparency as well, because if you can get people to believe that a once in a century pandemic isn't real or isn't as deadly or dangerous as they should believe, then you can get people to believe whatever you say. So you can put out a fake press release or some video pretending that you're working and that you're signing empty sheets of paper with a Sharpie. And you can get your doctors, I would imagine, to co-opt them in some way to try to paint a rosy picture of what's going on and hide behind HIPAA laws. Here's the thing. When you sign up to be a public servant, especially when you sign up to be the leader of the free world, there is no privacy when it comes to that. The American people deserve to know if their president is healthy, what illnesses the president might have, whether the president is compromised in any way to be able to carry out the duties of the Oval Office and of the American people. So you don't get to use that whole privacy thing when you're the president of the United States. It does not work that way. And so now that has translated into really no transparency when it comes to the president's condition. It has become the COVID-19 political celebrity apprentice reality show. It's what we're getting right now. We're getting a show from the president and the administration and his doctors. We're not getting full information and full transparency.
Well, I appreciate those answers, Don. They're great. Now let's rewind the clock a little bit. Let's go back from the beginning of your career. How did you start in journalism, and what were your expectations when you got there?
I started off in journalism basically as probably a 2 or 3 year old kid. Because I would go around to, I was always asking questions like most kids, why? But my questions went beyond why. I would go, as I wrote about in my first book, I would go around to, my family and I would be in restaurants. I would go to like different tables and ask people, what are you doing here? Are you on vacation? Why are you guys out to dinner? Blah, 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 blah. And my mom would try to get me to stop, and my dad would say, don't teach him to be afraid of people. So I've been asking questions since I can't even remember, but my parents and my family do. But I remember when I tried to follow in the footsteps of my dad, because that's what kids do. And people say, oh, that he's going to be a lawyer just like his dad, blah, 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 blah. And so I went to college, and I started in economics, and I was going to do pre-law, and I hated it. And then I think it was my freshman year of college, either senior year of high school or freshman year of college, where I saw this woman on the news, and her name was Jean West. And she looked like my family. She sounded like my family. She wasn't like JJ saying dynamite. And there were very few role models. This was just before the Cosby Show started. And pretty soon afterwards, the Cosby Show did start. But so the only person I saw who looked like my family on television was this Black anchor woman in Louisiana. And I saw her on the local news, and I said, that's what I want to do. And from that day on, I pursued journalism, and here I am. So that's how I started. That wasn't my first job, if you're asking that. That's a whole nother story.
Oh yeah, that's a good enough answer. Although I'd love to know, like, how many times did you have to move from station to station before you got to CNN?
So I left Louisiana because my journalism professor told me. I left LSU because my journalism professor told me that I would never make it as a journalist, and that was sort of the impetus to get me to move. I said, if I'm never going to achieve what I want to achieve, I'm going to have to leave this place, because I wasn't going to deal with it. And I wasn't going to be one of those people sitting there saying, well, I can do this as the jobs were passing, or as the mentality wasn't there. I figured there were other people who looked like me in the news business, but they just didn't happen to live in my town, or people weren't telling them they wouldn't make it as a journalist. So, as a Beverly Hillbillies opening theme says, loaded up the truck and they moved to Beverly. I loaded up my '87 Jeep Wrangler and I moved to New York City. And I started looking for jobs in newsrooms, and the only one that I could find was as a trainee at WNYW Fox 5 on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. So I took a job there, a traineeship at $5 an hour, which was below the poverty level really anywhere. I sublet an apartment in Astoria, Queens, and I started working, not even full time. It was a 6-month program. And then after about 4 or 5 months into the program, they said, would you like to become a production assistant? So I became a part-time production assistant. And then I would rip scripts and hand them, to the newsroom. And I became an assistant to the futures editor. And then I became a field producer. And I became the assignment editor. And I became a satellite beats coordinator. And I became a writer. And then I started doing little stories on the air for an urban affairs program that we had called the McCreary Report. Bill McCreary was a famous African-American anchor in New York. And then I started sending out my tape. And then this was the beginning of Fox, not Fox News, but the Fox stations. They started buying up all these new world stations around the country. And the first station I went to was Birmingham, Alabama, as the weekend anchor from New York. After having been there for 5 years, I spent 10 or 11 months in Birmingham. And then from Birmingham, I went to St. Louis. I spent 1.5 years in St. Louis. And from St. Louis, I went to Philadelphia. I spent 3 years there. And then I went to New York City to work as a correspondent for NBC News and fill in anchor. And then I stayed there for 2 years. And then I went to Chicago as the 5 o'clock anchor and fill in for the main anchor. I was there for 3 years, and then I went to Atlanta to CNN finally, and I spent 7 years there. And then I've been in New York City almost 7 years for CNN now. So that was my journey as a journalist.
And I think I lost count over the number of times that you were. I definitely lost count. I was trying to keep track. I think I counted 5, although it sounded like it was a lot more. But
yeah,
throughout your career, I am curious how difficult.
Hang on, let me count them for you. It's been
Sure.
New York, Birmingham, St. Louis, Philadelphia, New York, Chicago, Atlanta, New York. That's 8 moves.
Wow.
But there you go.
8. That's quite the journey. And so, how difficult was it being both a Black and gay man in the field of journalism when you were coming up? What challenges did you face?
The biggest challenge I faced, I think, was, well, obviously racism, because that was just baked into the cake. The other one was really fear for being gay. When I was in New York City working as a production assistant and trying to, become an on-air talent, people knew I was gay in the newsroom. It was New York City, so it was very open, very liberal, and people knew about it. But then when I started my journey and my jaunt across the country, so to speak, to small markets to get back to New York City, I had to keep that a secret. And so that was really, really tough because, it wasn't how it is now, with same-sex marriage being legal and everybody's out and people are getting married and, you can talk about your husband and your wife if you're gay or lesbian on the television. It wasn't that way. Things have changed, progressed very quickly in a short amount of time when it comes to that. So people were in the closet and people were threatened to out me all the time. And so my friends and people in the newsroom knew, but I didn't talk about it publicly. And they would only know once I left New York City if I chose to tell them. And I remember in one place I was in, the news director brought me in and said, "Oh my gosh, I'm hearing, people are spreading rumors around the newsroom that you're gay." And man, that must be awful. And you shouldn't, I just wanted to let you know. And I was just stunned of the ignorance. And so, but I didn't, even when I got to CNN, I was there for 5-6 years before I came out. I came out in 2011. So I would say that being gay was a challenge, but nobody really knew that I was. The biggest challenge was being a minority, being Black in this business, and people having different standards for you than they do for other people, and people and managers believing that a person of color could not hold a prime position on the news. That was an obstacle that I had to overcome. But once I came out, David, a lot of things changed. I became more self-empowered. I became more self-assured, and I had I don't think I was reckless, but I had a sort of devil-may-care attitude that if I wasn't going to live my life and do it now and do this job and live my life the way I want to and do this job the way I want to, then when was it ever going to happen? This was my life and my career. And so coming out really gave me that sense of self-empowerment and confidence that I needed. And the whole thing changed after that.
And were there ever times that you wanted to quit, just given the kind of adversity you were facing?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, it is racism and any kind of ism, sexism, racism, homophobia, and any of that. It can be debilitating and it can be crushing and it can be depressing. It's a burden. It's something that you carry on your shoulders, and sometimes you really can't explain it, especially to people who don't have to live it. Especially to people who have a certain privilege in the society and people who have a certain entitlement about the way America works and the world has worked for them for so long. It's tough to explain. But yeah, it was, I think I had a lot of sleepless nights. I think I would look probably 10 years younger if I didn't have all of that. Quite frankly, when you would wonder why you were just as talented, if not more talented, than you're a coworker, and you would not get the opportunities. And you know, in your mind, you knew how. In reality, you know how and why. But trying to explain that and fighting for that are two different things. Because if you fight for it too much, you worry about losing your job or becoming labeled as someone who is angry or a complainer or that sort of thing. So it's a box that you're trapped in. But then once you are free of that box and you no longer care anymore, it's very liberating. But on the other hand, it's very scary for people who are used to the world being a certain way, which is kind of what we're living in right now. This is, what I'm explaining is sort of a microcosm of the world. People are afraid now that people of color are on the streets and they don't want to take it anymore. And so they're like, "Whoa, I'm used to the world being this way." Well, it was the same thing in the news business for me. People were not used to a black man having a point of view in prime time or just on the network at all. And I said, guess what? I'm an American and I'm entitled to be able to do it just as much as you are. And I did it. And here I am.
And that actually led me to my next question here, just with respect to just news anchors. I mean, traditionally, when you hear about, you hear what a news anchor does, you would think that they usually would reserve opinion. But I'm going out on a limb here, and you've said it a few times that you're simply just not like that. You have a platform where you have challenged these guests and had no qualms about it. So what's driving that?
What's driving where I challenge guests and I have no qualm about it?
Yes, exactly.
Well, for so long, I was afraid. For so long, I would worry about, can I say this? Can I actually be who I am? Can I actually say what I want to say? Can I actually give my point of view? And in certain aspects, if I'm being asked when I'm not on the air, can I give my opinion? After I thought about it for a while, and I've come to the conclusion and the realization now that, listen, I'm just as American as anybody. And the people who came before me paid the price of the ticket for me. And if I wasn't emboldened, and if I didn't have the courage enough to be able to share my reality and the realities of America, then why am I in this business? Why am I doing it? Because I'm not in this business to have a big paycheck or to be famous or to be glamorous or to get a great table at a restaurant. I'm in this business to educate the American people, to give my point of view as an American who happens to be black, who happens to be gay, and who happens to be a man. So this country is for me just as much as it's for anybody else who's on any other network of any different persuasion or ethnicity or gender. And so if quite honestly, if the white males on Fox News if they have the privilege to be able to say whatever they want with impunity, then I should have a similar degree of privilege to be able to say whatever I want with impunity. Because I am no less an American because I'm a black gay man than they are. And so I came to that realization, and here I am. I have the right to be able to stand in my own truth and to be a journalist in whatever way I see fit as anybody else. And I'm not an activist journalist on CNN, but if I wanted to be, I have the right to be able to do that. I'm not an opinion journalist. I like to say I give my point of view, because if I give my point of view, I back it up by facts. But if I wanted to be an opinion journalist, I have the right to be that just like anybody else. And so I don't care about criticism. I don't care what people say about me. I'm here to educate the American public and to tell them the truth and to make sure that we have, especially in this time, an informed electorate. That's all that matters.
And this actually led me to what's happening in newsrooms. The protests that have happened throughout the year have sparked a greater talk about race in newsrooms, where journalists of color, for example, were kept from covering protests over perceptions that they may be biased in their coverage. What do you make of that?
I think that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I think that someone who tells you that you can't cover something and be objective is ridiculous. I mean, I think that is the height of bias and bigotry and racism. Because I own a home, it doesn't mean that I can't cover the housing crisis. Because I owe a mortgage, it doesn't mean that I can't do that. Because I receive medical treatment, it doesn't mean that I can't cover a medical story. It's ridiculous because a woman can't cover a story about women, a man can't cover a story fairly about men. It's ridiculous, and it's that only proves the point about diversity, not just in newsroom, in the news business, but in all aspects, in all businesses in America. But especially so at this time, when you look at the summer of unrest, the summer of George Floyd, of what I call the fall of Breonna Taylor, meaning capital FALL, the season. When I look at that, when you look at that, you cannot think otherwise. Diversity in newsrooms is more important than it has ever been. We're at a racial boiling point, a racial reckoning in this country right now, where people are standing up and they are finally saying, I don't want it to be this way. You guys, you old guys like you, Don Lemons, and you whatever older folks, you've worked really hard, but you haven't really taken us far enough. You haven't carried the ball far enough. And as much as we may get mad about that and say, oh, you know, I've done this and I was here and I broke barriers, young people aren't having that. They're just sick of it. And so I think it's more important for diversity now, even with the fear of the last gasp of a certain preeminent voice in this society. Even with that, things are going to change. And it's important for us to have diverse voices to be able to understand the place that we are in this country right now. It should be told by many different voices, not just one voice, and not just from the people who have always been in charge and who have always had the preeminent voice. That's the whole point of this thing.
And, you know, I was doing a little bit of research about diversity in newsrooms, and it said there was a Pew Research Center study in 2018 that showed that while 77% of newsrooms are white, only 7% are comprised of Black journalists in a country that's 13% Black. And you're among that 7%. So how can newsrooms reverse this? Where does it begin?
Well, I think that it's obviously going to have to begin in, listen, I'm not a news manager, but I will certainly take my degree of responsibility in it, that I can be more vocal, and I am. And people who are in positions like me should be more vocal and should have the courage to tell the people who are in charge and to remind them daily, often, of the need of diversity in newsrooms, and especially when it comes to people of color. Now, we can all do better, and not just in journalism and broadcast journalism and print journalism or what have you, but in all aspects of our society. The journalism is no different than Fortune 500 companies. They have a diversity issue, and we do as well. And so we have to be honest about that. But in that honesty, we have to allow people the room to grow. And managers and people who do the hiring have to listen to people like me who have been there, who can offer them advice, who are trying to help them. And I think that's the only way that we are going to make a difference, is if we actually listen to each other. The other issue, though, is that, as you know, being in journalism is not the most lucrative thing that you can do, especially now. You know, you can start your own blog, you can start your own whatever, you can make more money. And many times people have to take care of their families. And so the number of people who want to become journalists whittles down, I think, every year that people start taking jobs away in newsrooms, and print staffs become smaller and smaller and smaller. Broadcast staffs become smaller and smaller and smaller. I think it's going to be a struggle. It's going to be a challenge to be able to recruit all kinds of people, but especially minorities who want to feed their families, and especially men who want to be able to take care of their families, you know, in the traditional sense. It's going to be tough to recruit people to come into journalism. It's not that it can't be done. We can figure out how to do it, but I think that it's going to be tougher to do it in a number of aspects, in a number of ways.
Yeah, and one thing I think a lot about is just retention as well, because you can hire a journalist of color, but sometimes just retaining them and keeping them can also become a challenge. So, how do you retain journalists of color? What can be done?
You treat them with respect and you pay them. You pay them. It's simple as that. You respect them, you give them opportunities, and you pay them what they're paying. What you pay them the same as their white counterparts, and you pay them for their skills. Diversity is something that people bring to the table as well. Just as my colleagues who are medical correspondents and medical doctors or what have you, they bring something to the table as someone who is that. Just as my colleagues who do business, who talk about the stock market and the economy, they have a particular skill. I have a particular skill that I think that is very important that I can bring to the table that, quite frankly, my white counterparts don't have. And that is I operate in this society as a Black man, as a gay man. And I think that has some degree of, that's a commodity in a certain sense, or something that I can offer that other people can't. And so you can look at certain personality traits or background traits for people, and you can see the importance and how and what you can invest in that person. So I think that we need to rethink what we think are promotable and workable skills, hireable skills, because being a minority in America is a skill. I think that many of my counterparts don't really have, and they don't understand, and that has become glaringly obvious in this particular time that we're in now.
And with respect to rethinking, just sort of like just the whole big picture of news and news gathering, I am curious with this question on newsrooms reevaluating what they think objectivity is, especially during this administration and during these protests. So how should newsrooms kind of redefine objectivity? How important is sort of contextualizing the history of objectivity, sort of its creation, to carve a path forward?
Well, what do you mean by that? By the way, when I'm looking up, I'm actually looking at the monitor because the news is so crazy, and I'm looking to see what what I'm going to have to cover later because I need to be. Yeah. So I'm looking up here. I'm not like I know you people.
The question is,
but what do you?
Sure. The question is essentially, people always want to tell the news as straight as they can give it, without sort of like injecting sort of like a word that is sort of like inflammatory, to say the least. So, for example, last July, there was a big discussion over whether or not newsrooms should just call Donald Trump racist, or just sort of peg it on someone else who was calling him racist. And so newsrooms were really going back and forth over whether or not they should just flat out call him a racist and flat out call him a liar. And so there's been a discussion over whether or not the old traps of objectivity kind of work these days. And, whether or not someone like President Trump has really kind of like had everyone sort of take a step back and say, okay, we can't really treat the Trump presidency objectively anymore. We have to call it out. So it sort of like begs the question over whether or not moving forward there should be
that's a trap.
Okay, tell me why.
That's a trap. That's a trap because you call a spade a spade. You know what racism is. You know it when you see it. You know it when you hear it. And so by pretending something isn't, or pegging something on someone else, does not mean that you are being objective. The objective truth with the evidence gathered is whatever it is. And so I think that we're in a different time now because people are pretending that they're not. People are pretending the new racism is calling out racism. That's not what it is, or as they call it, the new racism is reverse racism. There's no such thing as reverse racism. Reverse racism means equality. That's what reverse racism means. If you say that, you can't say, well, a Black person something, that's reverse racism. No, if a Black person is being racist, they're being racist. Okay, that's a whole other thing. But stop it with that term reverse racism, because there's reverse racism, as I said, is equality. There's no such thing if you're trying to use a definition in that way that means that you're discriminating against someone else. That's not what it is. But by calling something what it is does not mean that you're not being objective. especially as a journalist. Journalists are supposed to call an is. A certain situation, you're supposed to call it what it is. So it was hard for me to call the President of the United States a liar, but the objective truth, the objective truth, all evidence pointed to whatever statements this president was making were lies. All evidence pointed to whatever this president was doing or saying or being in the moment was racist. Why shouldn't journalists say that? Because they want to tiptoe around it. I understand that we may have more respect for the office of the presidency than the person who is in it. But that does not give us the right to not call something what it is. And so as that is our job as a journalist to do that. If the president of the United States didn't want people renting or buying his apartments and tried to steer Black people in another direction, that's a racist act. If the president of the United States wanted Black men who were exonerated to go to prison and called them names and took out ads, that is a racist act. If he called countries, African countries, shithole countries, that is a racist act. If the president says things like my African American or what do you have to lose, if he does something that's racist, then it's racist. And we have to call it out as journalists. Otherwise, we're not doing our jobs and we're doing a disservice to the American people, and we may as well go take a job doing something else.
And I guess the question then too, like, would the general public understand this more? The fact that we are using these terms, which you correctly point out are based on evidence, but will the public sort of just take this kind of moral clarity as an example of like being lectured or sort of like setting an agenda, or just trying to sort of like present a perception that maybe they don't agree with?
But is that really our job to placate to the American public, or is it our job to tell the truth and to inform the American public? And they can receive it however they want. Listen, I understand that you have to, you want people to listen to you, but at the end of the day, as hard as it may seem, as much as people want to cast something on it that isn't, I think we've become so used to people saying, oh, this is the right and this is the left. And when we buy into that fake thing about that and the liberal media and all of that, that's a talking point. That's to discredit journalists and journalism. I think regardless if you're a Republican or a Democrat, you can discern the truth versus a lie. You know when something's political or not political. And so I really don't buy into that, that you have to sugarcoat things to make people listen. People don't sugarcoat racism. People don't sugarcoat violence. People don't sugarcoat misogyny. When they do it, they're usually flat out doing it, or they know that they're doing it, right? And if they don't know that they're doing it, and if they're not aware of it, that can be equally as bad. So I don't think it's a journalist's job to sugarcoat anything. I think it's our job just to tell it like it is. And this is not a children's program. It's not Sesame Street. This is not a cartoon on Saturday morning. If you're watching the news, if you're a journalist, you're an adult. And adults should be able to take information, whether it's serious or not. That's it.
We're getting a couple questions from our audience here. We have one question from our president. You explain America to white people every night. It's an important platform, but doesn't it get exhausting?
I explain America to white people. I never really thought about it that way. What I'm doing is, I'll just answer the second part. So I'll let you think that. I'm not sure if I'm doing that, but maybe I am. Probably so, because I'm the only person who's like me in this position. Does it get exhausting? Yeah, look at the circles under my eyes right now. I was just talking to my colleague Chris Cuomo, and we were both looking at pictures of us when we were at some personal thing, and we were like in 2015, and we were like, gosh, look what happened to us in 5 years. And that was just before the escalator ride down. Yeah, it's exhausting, but I'm up to the challenge because there's never been a more important time, I think, to be a domestic journalist, not a journalist in the war zone, than now. I think it was during the height of the civil rights movement and during the Vietnam War. But I think this is a really important time to be a journalist because during those times, journalism wasn't under attack to the degree that it is now. And so it's a really important time to be a journalist, and I'm happy that I have the privilege to do so.
And we have a couple more questions here. What advice would you give to students who are going to graduate and presumably in the field of journalism?
I would say, first of all, thank you for becoming journalists, because I think there are journalists, people who are graduating and wanting to become journalists. I think that it gets slimmer and fewer and farther between. I would say every year, we're in a different time now because of COVID, and I'm not really in the office. Well, I'm in the office, but the interns are not there, so I don't get to really interact with them. But every semester, I would get people who would say, "Well, how do I make it? I'm a lesbian, as a strong lesbian, or as a strong Black woman, or as a strong Black man, or as a strong gay man, or as a powerful Asian." And I would just say to them, stop otherizing yourself, because people are going to otherize you without you doing it. And what you should do is worry about being excellent. And all those other otherisms and things that you worry about, you give that or bring that to people like me, or to people of color who are on the news like me, or Lester Holt, or Robin, or Joy Reid, or someone, people who have been there, who can actually help you and who actually have some currency in this business and some juice, right? And the credibility to be able to take care of situations for you or help guide you through situations. So don't worry about those things. Stop otherizing yourself. Worry about being excellent. And trust me, even with all the isms and the phobias and all of that, excellence always rises. The cream always rises. And if you stay committed, if you believe in yourself, if you're excellent, you too can be a Don Lemon or even better.
We have another question here. What is a typical day like for you? What is the first thing you do when you get up?
Besides go, oh my gosh, what's happened in the world since the last 5 hours I checked this phone? That's usually the first thing I do. That's a really bad habit that I didn't do before, but things can change so quickly now that I usually check the phone. And then I just immediately start interacting with my producers about stories that I see. And usually I'll turn on a morning show, a cable morning show. I don't really watch the network morning shows because I want news all the time. So I'll turn on a cable morning show, one of the cable morning shows, and I'll go between. I used to go between the CNN, MSNBC, CNBC, and Fox. But it is so hard to watch Fox right now because it's become an arm of the administration, and it's just really tough. So I can't watch them. So usually I'll go between CNBC, CNN, and MSNBC to try to get some news in the morning. And then I read the papers online. And then after I read the papers, I don't go on social media until after, because I don't want someone to form my opinion about something that I've read until I form my own opinion about it. So that's usually what I do in the morning. And then I wake up, I do all those things. If I have time, I'll tune into the network morning call, the editorial call. I'll do it usually if I have time, but I don't really worry about that because my show is a whole another day away. So a 9 a.m. editorial call means nothing to a 10 p.m. show, especially in this news cycle. So usually I'll wake up, do that, and then I'll take a nap. And that's when I'll probably get my REM sleep, because I don't get home until 1 in the morning or sometimes later. And then after that, I get up and I start interacting with producers, putting stories, giving them ideas. They're feeding ideas back to me. We start talking about guests. And then I jump in the car and I spend, an hour or two in traffic. And then I get to CNN I do my show, and then I get back in the car and I spend, an hour or so in traffic, and then I start all over again.
And I am curious, what time do you then wake up if you're going to sleep at, I'm assuming like 1-ish, maybe you go to sleep?
Oh no, I go to bed later than 1. I mean, I don't get home until 1.
Okay.
Sometimes 2. It depends. Because I live in Harlem, but I also have a small place in the suburbs that especially during COVID, I used to only go like every once in a while on the weekends, and now it's become sort of my place since COVID. But that's starting to reverse now. So I wasn't getting to bed until like 3 in the morning. So now with things getting back to normal, where I'm in the city more, I probably get to bed around 2. And then I'm usually up around 7, and then I'm back in bed about 8:30, and then I wake up probably around 11, and then The View is my morning show.
So how long has that been happening?
I got to watch my friends Joy and Sunny, because I used to work with Sunny, and I know Joy, and I know Whoopi, and so they're actually my morning show. That's been that way since I've been in prime time. It's been the same thing.
Wow.
I used to get a lot less sleep because I had to do radio. I used to do the Tom Joyner morning show. And so I'd have to write my commentary, and then I'd have to send it to them for approval, and then they would approve it, and then I would do it on the radio in the morning. So I used to really get no sleep until during the day. But I had to stop that when Trump was running for president, because I then gained 2 hours of programming instead of 1, and it was just too much for me to do. So I don't get a lot of. I get sleep. It's like I get lots of naps.
Right. It seems like it seems as if it's not like my typical 7 hours. I need 7 hours, otherwise I can't function. But for you, it's 5 hours and then a couple of these naps along the way. That's
5 would be good.
Good strategy to go. So, another question here. Because the president's press conferences are filled with so many inaccuracies, what can the media do in real time to challenge his messaging so the press doesn't become another conduit for his propaganda?
Ooh, that's really tough. You sound like you're listening to my emails to my producers. Listen, I'm not the head of the network, so I don't get to decide, what runs and when. But a lot of his press conferences I wouldn't take live, and I would just maybe put them on later or run them on a delay. This is just me speaking. I'm not a network head or chief, so that they would know better than I do. But I think we really have to change the way we do business, because there's so much misinformation out there. And once the misinformation, especially coming from the leader of the free world, once that is gotten out into the public, people believe it. So you know what they say, that a lie can travel around the world or globe or whatever before the truth gets out of bed. That's true. If the president, what he has learned is that if he says something often enough and loud enough and emphatic enough, certain people will believe it. And when it's not true, very little of what he says is true. And so the sad thing is that we're in a position right now, going back to one of your earlier questions, where people don't believe what the president is saying and the people around him in a moment of crisis. When the president of the United States has contracted COVID-19, people are still wondering, well, is he telling the truth? Is he faking it? Are doctors leveling with us? Are they being real? And when has that ever happened in the history of our country? Not many times, except now. So I think that I would probably do less live events and more analysis, because you can still get the full focus of what the president says without giving him complete reign and your entire platform to spread misinformation in real time.
And one last question here in our Q&A. In your professional career, has any event that you covered or anybody that you met or any event or any story left you speechless?
Well, I think what's going on now, today was certainly a speechless day when the president of the United States is trying to equate COVID to having your best life ever, and sort of that it's really great and you shouldn't be concerned about it and what have you. It's like, oh, it's a great thing to get COVID. I think that left me speechless. And quite frankly, I was speechless. I've been speechless during so many events with this president, but this one is probably the most egregious. And this one, it will be even more egregious if we allow this administration to have a full-on super spreader event where people have become sick, where they have completely disregarded their responsibility, and they have been reckless about what they're doing and their messaging that's coming out. Do as I say, not as I do. When they haven't set the example for the rest of the country, or set the wrong example for the rest of the country. If we allow this to become a reality show moment for the president, where he goes out and he waves at the public and potentially infects his staff and his Secret Service agents, if we allow all the pageantry of the White House and Air Force One and Marine One and the background to be used as backgrounds to convey a political message for the president to be reelected, then I think we've really reached a sad state in America. So I am speechless, but I'm on the verge of being just gobsmacked by what is happening in the country and how people are being sold a bill of goods right now.
And I think we'll wrap it up there. Don Lemon, we want to thank you so much for joining. Yeah, that's it. Unless you just want one more.
No, I'm good. It's up to you, but I'm good. Yeah, I've got to run. Considering the news today, I've got to go.
Got it. This concludes our second virtual speaker series. Once again, Don Lemon, we really want to thank you for your time. And the New York Press Club thanks once again Con Edison for sponsoring this event. Our next guest for our speaker series is on October 14th with David Enrich. And back to our president.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don, for your time and your candor, and thank you, David, for your questions. I hope you've enjoyed this second presentation. In the coming weeks, you'll hear from the AP's Jonathan Lemire, David Enrich, author of the book Dark Towers about Donald Trump and Deutsche Bank, Adam Liptak of the New York Times, and Susan Zirinsky, the president of CBS News. You can find out the details on our website at nypressclub.org. Again, that's nypressclub.org. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Con Ed, once again. We are very grateful. And to Phil O'Brien, Stephanie Forshee, Carl Leibowitz, and all the members of the New York Press Club who helped make this event possible. I'm Jane Tillman Irving. Thank you for being with us. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.